One of the fundamental concepts of programming is to use variables. Variables are a way of storing information and attaching it to a value. So I can use A and I can give it a value of hello world. Now there's different types of variables. I can do variable B, and I can give it an integer value. So I can give it a value of 10 or something like that. And I can also do what's called a Boolean. So Boolean is either true or false. So it's a positive or a negative switch. And these are more commonly used for conditional statements where you just want to know if something is true or false. And it's important to understand the concepts of a Boolean. So it can only hold two different values. It can only be true or false, a 1 or a 0 value. And that's where we're going to look at conditions later on with Booleans. So for now, I'm just going to put true. So C is true. And there's actually different ways to declare variables. In JavaScript, you always need to declare a variable. So if I try to use something like first name, and actually I'm going to do document write. So this is actually going to write out that value on the screen. And I'm going to just do first name. So the difference here when I'm doing a document write, and if we go to the inspect element, we should see that there's an error here, that it's actually not accepting that because it's actually undefined. So this is the reason why we have to define variables. So instead of first name, and again, when I'm doing document write, so now when I write out A, I should write out hello world because it's so these errors are we're not looking at these anymore, and we're just able to write out variables that have been defined. So always make sure you define your variables, and common practice is to set up these variables initially and set up all the variables that you're going to be using at the top. And this is also for readability. So if you've got a bunch of values over here that you're using throughout your code, the best practice is always to declare them at the top. Sometimes the case might be that you might want to declare a variable or a value that's used within a function. So then you would be declaring a variable, and you'd give a variable a name and declare it within a function. So we're going to look at that in the upcoming lectures as well. You can also declare multiple variables, and they don't necessarily need to have a value. So these are just going to be blank, empty variables. So even if I write this, I'm actually not going to get an error message because these are declared variables, and this is how I declare multiple variables. I can also assign multiple values to these, so I don't have a defined value, so I'm just going to do it as D, and then I'm going to do this one as E. So now I see that it does write these out. So to declare multiple variables, you can start out with the var equals or the variable name that you want to use, and the variable names can be anything that you want. There are a few rules. You can't start them with numbers, so you can't do something like 1D. So right away we get that error message there. So always make sure that the variables are being declared as a character, and then you could list other letters or numbers. So we can do D1, which is acceptable. So D1 is actually going to be different than uppercase D, so they are case sensitive as well. So when you're working with variables, you got to be aware that they are case sensitive. So if you have something that's really long and you type it hello world, so it's not necessarily going to be the same as hello world with a lowercase. And usually it's not good practice to be interchanging, to be calling them the same thing. And we do use what's called the camel case. So we start out with a lowercase first, and then if we have a second word, we uppercase that. And this gives us, it makes it more readable. So readability is one of the factors why we do these kind of camel case. But either way will work, and as long as you're not putting a number in front of the name of the variable. The rules, you can't space it out because that's not going to work. Either you can't have punctuation, you can't have any characters that aren't letters or digits, but you can underscore. So if you want to underscore, you are able to underscore. And just make sure that it's not a digit first, and remember that they are case sensitive.